No. All right, so anyway, I'm going to talk about, this is, just in case you were wondering what the title is, DJ, what do Muslims want? Okay? All right? This is a presentation I gave to the high schoolers who come on campus and take a look at King. I did this, a week ago Monday, I think it was. And I was really nervous about doing it because you're supposed to do a good impression, you know? That's the idea. You want them to actually come to King. And I don't know, it was a great group of kids, about 60 kids. Almost nobody talked. I don't know if I terrified them or what, you know? No, Alexander's.
I had to give the same talk, well, not what do Muslims want, but I had to do a talk last year. And
Where?
It was like here. I had to talk to the high school students about the business school, and it was.
You did the same thing?
It was what do Christians want, but.
Oh, Christians, Muslims.
No, it was about business school.
Okay.
But it was awful.
Yeah, it's kind of.
I realized why I got my PhD. I wouldn't have to deal with high school students.
All right. So, did you all know your new honors student? Dr. Brumlick? Okay.
No, he wasn't accepted.
That's only because he misbehaves so much. All right. All right. So anyway, so I gave this, and Craig was there, and I was doing something else for you guys. And so it's the second time I've done it. So basically, feel free to ask questions, disagree, give me some critique, you know, or have a good nap. All right. What do Muslims want? I want to talk about Charlie Hebdo and what you all know about Charlie Hebdo. Yes? Lie to me. Okay? Don't? Yes? Okay? 2-3 weeks ago, I think especially for us as Americans, this is being taped, so yeah, thank you. Charlie Hebdo. And so I think a lot of times in the West, and rightly so, but we're really shocked. I remember, I actually asked the question in Foundations last week, how old were you all when 9/11 happened? All right, how old were you all when 9/11 happened?
7.
How old were you?
Like 7.
You were 7?
7 or 8.
Golly dang.
Yeah, like 8.
8? How some of the rest of you? You kids fall asleep back there. What? How old were you when 9/11 happened? What? Almost everybody in Foundations, except for the seniors who wait till the very last semester to take that class. Almost everybody else, they were 4 and 5 years old. It's just really stunning. And most, right? And most, so now we have a generation, do you remember 9/11?
Yep.
Okay.
I remember where I was sitting.
All right. We have a generation that really is getting to the place where they don't even remember it. All right. Most of the kids in Foundations class out of 90, they don't remember it. I remember, of course, 9/11, it was kind of interesting. I was thinking about it the other day. It's like I'm still processing it. I remember the day I was in Seattle at the time, and I think it was about 9 o'clock Seattle time. Maybe it was earlier than that. But the images started coming across the screen, and I didn't even know how to even contextualize this, how to even handle this. And to this day, Americans are just really shocked that someone would use such an extreme violence against the West. All right, and for most of us, I think this is one of the reasons why it was so shocking, was essentially, this is just so far out of our context. All right, Charlie Hebdo, a couple of weeks ago in France, obviously it was shocking, it's horrifying, and I'm not here tonight to talk about answers to this, obviously, but essentially, I want to look at Islam through the eyes of Charlie Hebdo. What's going on? If this is so shocking to our system, what's going on? Why do the Muslims basically have a problem? And I'm going to use 2 terms here, Islam in the West in the 21st century. All right, 3 terms. but I want to talk about Islam and the clash, if you will, between the West. Now, the reason why I use the term West, you can even think about it this way. West, when I use the term West, I mean that the whole world revolves around the West. And this is a problem that many Muslims have with Americans in particular, that everything is oriented to the West and from the West. And we need to, point well taken. But the problem that we are facing in 2015 is essentially we in the West have come into contact with Islam, and at this point, most of you, if you've studied this, you've either heard nothing or very little, or you've probably heard misinformation. And I think sometimes we deal with tragedies like this with, and I'll give you an example of a statement, all Muslims are violent, or Islam is just a violent religion. And so, Christianity isn't, that's kind of the idea, Christianity isn't, but Islam is. And so, let's look at Charlie Hebdo, what's going on, why did they do that when, we're so happy in the West, all right? So on the morning of 7 January 2015 at about 11:30 local time in Paris, 2 masked gunmen armed with assault rifles and other weapons forced their way into the offices of the French satirical weekly newspaper Charlie Hebdo in Paris. 3 years before this, this was not new to them. 3 years before this, the entire building here was bombed, and so a number of them had bodyguards. They actually had, was it 2 policemen? I know 2 policemen died. I think there were more. Who were guarding them. Obviously, they couldn't do anything. So, in some ways, at least Charlie Hebdo and the people associated with Charlie Hebdo, this obviously it was quite a surprise, obviously quite a shock, but they were used to the threats. Okay. Who were these 2 jihadists? And basically, now we know that these 2 jihadists were the Kouachi brothers. And when I first heard what had gone on, I think I was, if that's 11, what is Paris, 5 hours ahead? I think about 7:30, I was listening to NPR, I was driving in, and I heard that this had happened. And one of my first questions was, I wondered if these were immigrants, if these were actually Algerians. Who were these guys? Even before I heard their names or anything, that was basically 2 questions. Sharif and Saeed Kouachi, by the way, anybody know where they're from? Where are their parents from? Algeria, excellent, okay? Sharif and Saeed Kouachi, who were in their mid-30s, actually had kind of a history with some Islamic extremism. Sharif, in 2005, all right, 10 years ago, he was very offended by Abu Ghraib, the prison. All right, anybody, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so we go to Iraq, March 2013, and in 2005, these pictures come out. All right, and this is actually, I went online and tried to find, well, I didn't try, I found pictures of, that the American military had taken. And this is about the tamest one that I could put up there, especially when I'm talking to 16-year-olds from high school. But obviously, Muslim man from Iraq. And these pictures, have you all seen the pictures? Some of the pictures? These particular pictures were published. Well, Sharif was very offended by what was happening to his brothers, to his Muslim compatriots in Iraq. He got so offended and got so worked up. He's about 25 at this point, early 20s, mid-20s. He gets on an airplane to go. He actually wants to go to Syria, at that time not in a civil war. He wants to go and study Arabic, supposedly, and then get over to Iraq, and he wants to fight now against the Americans because of these images that were proven. Before he goes, he wants to learn how to shoot an AK-47, a Kalashnikov, Russian. This is the weapon for a number of the Muslim extremists. And this is Paris, this is France, you're not supposed to be able to get something like this. And he couldn't get something like this. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is in some ways, I want you to see how naive and kind of innocent this is. He can't get a Kalashnikov, and so he gets a picture, and he copies it, and he has a friend that he knows who has shot an AK-47, and before he gets on the airplane, he gets his friend to basically, from a drawing, show him how to shoot an AK-47. All right, so this is a guy that basically, he's not radicalized at this point, I don't think. As he's getting on the airplane on January the 25th in 2005, he's actually getting on an Air Italia flight, and he's arrested just as he gets on. What did they do with Sharif? Well, he goes to prison for 20 months. Actually ends up in a prison in Paris. NPR just recently did a special on this prison. All of their radicalized Muslims, they have a number of them in this prison. They're in solitary confinement. And the way that they communicate with one another is they tear up parts of their sheets, write on the sheets, and then they pass these little messages to one another. When he is in prison, he meets the #1 operative from Saudi Arabia. This is their #1 operative. He's in prison, and at this point, here's a kid, very innocent, hasn't even drawn an AK-47, doesn't have a real one. He gets arrested, gets up in prison, and then this guy, most people believe that this is the point where Sharif became radicalized. Okay? I don't have time, I won't take time. There's a great website. Do you want me to put this up somewhere or send this somewhere, or Craig, or?
Yeah, I can send it out. I'll send it out to
Well, I don't know that anybody, but anyway, great article here that kind of talks about the process of radicalization. Here are the two brothers who commit these acts. All right, before I go there, let me say this. How did these two boys, who we now know they were orphans, and they grew up in Paris in the foster care system. Their parents were immigrants from Algeria. How did these two boys end up terrorizing Paris like this? Again, why would these boys from Islam attack the West in such a violent way? And part of what I'm going to answer, let me be very careful with this. Part of my answer is, well, we need to understand Islam. We need to understand what is going on with Islam. Obviously, I disagree with Islam because, no bones about it, I come from a Christian worldview. But I think we ought to be intelligent about that. And so I'm not here to tell you, well, the reason why these boys did this is because Islam is a violent religion and Muhammad, blah, 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 all right? That's too easy, that's too simple, I think that's actually wrong. So I think if we're going to understand how these two boys became radicalized, we need to understand Islam, and then why do they have a problem with the West? In doing so, we need to go back to Muhammad. Okay? All right. By the way, when do I give the quiz? Do I do a quiz online and then? Yeah. Okay. All right. So Muhammad, this is a shot of a cave that is right outside of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. You and I can't go there. They do allow Westerners in there. You can actually go, you can't even go into the city of Mecca. To get into Mecca, you have to have a letter from your cleric that says you are you're legit, you're converted. This is, though, supposedly, no one's proven this, but this is supposedly the cave that Muhammad went to. And notice the date. In the month of Ramadan, in about 610, Muhammad would go, he went to this cave, and he spent the month in this cave. And during that month, he fasted, and then anybody who had needs could come and visit him. And so, notice, you've all heard of Ramadan, right? Why is Ramadan, which is the month of fasting, why is it called Ramadan? Because Ramadan is the Arabic word for that month. Okay? So in 610, all right, this is 610 CE, Muhammad is born somewhere around 570. He's 40 years old. He is drawn more and more as he gets older to spiritual matters. What was the religion of the Arabs in 610?
Like polytheism.
It was polytheism. Good. All right. Who did they worship? What was their religion? You might know. Essentially, and I want you to remember this term, they lived in tribes. Their ideology was tribalism, and each tribe had different gods and goddesses. And so we don't know if this is true or not, but before Muhammad comes on the scene, you're absolutely right, these are polytheists. Before Muhammad comes on the scene, this was a tribal culture. And by the way, when I say tribal, sometimes when people talk about tribal, it's pejorative, it's derogatory. I don't mean this in a pejorative way. They lived in tribes as Bedouins. And Muhammad was actually born in Mecca. He's born in a tribe. He's actually born in the wealthiest, most important tribe. But as we'll see in just a few minutes, he eventually becomes an orphan. And this becomes very important for Muhammad. But it's a tribal culture, and people talk about the idea that, I'll show you the Kaaba in just a minute, but the Kaaba is probably the holiest place to the Muslim. It's kind of like the temple in Jerusalem, or what used to be the temple. And the idea was that before Muhammad came, and while Muhammad was young, there were 360 gods and goddesses there in the Kaaba. All right? So it's polytheism, it's tribalistic culture. Muhammad becomes increasingly spiritual. He goes up to this cave during Ramadan, and he will spend the month in, I'm going to teach you a little bit of Arabic today. He spends the month in prayer. The Arabic word is salat, and giving alms, zakat. You're like, why are you giving us? Who cares about the Arabic? Well, I want you to know that in Islam there are 5 pillars. Okay? Every Muslim comes back to these 5 pillars. They practice this very differently, but they come back to this. All right? 2 of the pillars, that's why I'm telling you this, 2 of the pillars for every Muslim is prayer, and now it's typically 5 times a day. And then another pillar is zakat, giving alms to others. All right? Well, Muhammad, before he becomes a monotheist, he's up by himself in this cave in 610, and he has a profound experience. And essentially, I'll show you this later, but he believes and will teach that the angel Gabriel comes and visits him. He thinks he's going to die. The angel almost squeezes him to death, and then basically says to Muhammad, recite, this is what you're going to say, this is what you're going to write down. All right? Here's Kaaba, and by the way, as you know, this is 21st century. This is the Kaaba, this is Mecca, this is, there's a mountain over here where the cave is. This Kaaba, the Muslims believe this Kaaba goes all the way back to Abraham and his son. Who's Abraham's son? Who's Abraham's son? This is not Genesis, this is the Quran. Who's Abraham's son? What? Excellent. This is Ishmael. And so even though all three monotheistic faiths go back to Abraham, Muslims take it back to Ishmael, Jews take it back to Isaac. According to the Quran and according to Muslim tradition, Abraham and his son Ishmael actually travel. They do a Hajj, they do a pilgrimage all the way down to Mecca, and they're the first ones who build this quote-unquote temple, this place. And so when Muslims go to Mecca and pray around the Kaaba, this goes all the way back to Abraham. All right? And so the Meccans at the time, let's go back to 610, at the time when Muhammad has this profound experience during the month of Ramadan, the Meccans traded around this temple, and they believed that this temple, even though it had 360 gods and goddesses in here, they believed that this temple, the high god, was actually Allah. All right? So they've got 360 gods and goddesses, but the number one God, most powerful God, is Allah. This, at the time, was the most important shrine in Arabia. And then during the time of Muhammad, now watch this, during the time of Muhammad, pilgrims came each year to make a Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Here's what I want you to remember. Mecca at this time is the hub of trade. So people that were going up north to Jerusalem and Damascus and on into Europe, you've probably heard of spices from India, so forth and so on. If it came from Africa, it came from India, it came through here. So Mecca was the hub. And obviously this became very important religiously, but it was also very important economically. And so notice I put this in bold. Here's the third pillar. So Zakat, Salat, and Hajj. You've probably heard of Hajj before. At some point in a Muslim's life, at least for Sunni Muslims, you should make the Hajj one time to Mecca. All right? It's very expensive. Back in the old days, before airplanes and so forth, it took a lot of money. Very expensive to get there. You did this at great sacrifice. Once you make the Hajj, and you've probably heard of this before, American military, they call some of the Arabs, especially in Iraq, they call them Hajis. And it's a very pejorative term. It's used against them. But when a Muslim talks about being a Haji, that means they have actually made the Hajj. Okay? Here is Mecca when it's the time of the Hajj. They only do it at a certain time every year. Over 2 million people come into Mecca. As you can see, this is actually people. And then here's the Kaaba. And then they make their way, they pray and walk around the Kaaba. The Hajj actually lasts, you kind of think it's a one-time thing, it lasts for at least 8 days. During the time of Muhammad, some Meccans believed that Allah was the same deity worshipped by Jews and Christians. All right, this becomes very important. When you read the Quran, here's a little quiz question for you. When you read the Quran, is Muhammad mentioned more or Jesus? Probably know which direction. Jesus occurs, the name Jesus occurs in the Quran more than the name Muhammad. Is Mary in the Quran? Say yes. Is Moses in the Quran? Oh yeah. All right. Isaiah. All these different things, all these different elements that are in the Old Testament and in the New Testament are also in the Quran. And so the Arabs, and in particular Muhammad, who was a caravan driver, we think that he probably went up to Jerusalem and up to at least Damascus. We think that he came into contact with Jews and Christians. We know that he studied with Jews. He talks about this. The Arabs are very acute that they know that about Christianity and Judaism, but they also know that they don't have their own religion, if you will. They are aware that they didn't have their own scriptures in particular. And before Muhammad came, there was kind of this idea is, when is God going to come and visit us as Arabs? There was even a prophecy about the coming of a prophet. And some people believe that Muhammad would be that one. Many expected a prophet. Muhammad, as I said, was born about 570. And I think this becomes very important. And I don't want to be cheesy with this. I don't want to make just some, real quick, simplistic connection. But Muhammad was orphaned by the age of 6. So he lost his father, lost his mother. His grandfather did survive a couple more years. By the age of 8, he lost his closest family. He was turned over to his uncle, Abu Talib. And Abu Talib will actually become very influential later on. He will save Muhammad's life. But now, I mentioned this earlier, I want you to stop here and realize that he is in a tribal culture. If you're in a tribal culture, how do you survive? And the only way that you can survive in a tribal culture is by being a part of the tribe and being protected by the tribe. And so there was a point, for instance, again, totally hypothetical, but had it not been for his protector, Abu Talib, Muhammad as an orphan could have been sold, could have been a slave. Basically, you had no rights if you lived outside of the tribe and the clan. This becomes very important for Islam. It becomes very important for Muhammad. In many ways, he becomes an outsider as a boy. Okay? So, on the 17th night of Ramadan, the angel Gabriel in Arabic, Jibril, comes and says, Iqra. Probably totally sacrificing that terribly. In Arabic, to recite. And by the way, the Quran, you can see the similarities there. The Quran essentially is the Arabic word that means recite. Okay? The Quran claims that Muhammad received revelation for the next 23 years. It's very important. A lot of people think that he had this experience when he was 40 years old there in that cave, and then that was kind of the end of the revelations. According to the Muslims, the revelations occurred for the next 23 years until Muhammad died. There were two areas. If you're going to understand Islam and what's going on in Islam, there are two areas that become very important in Muhammad's life. He grew up in Mecca, and of course that is the holiest place in Islam. The second holiest place, anybody know? What?
Medina.
Excellent. All right, very good. It's Medina. And so Mecca and Medina, at some point, we'll see in just a minute, Muhammad will have to leave Mecca. He goes to Medina and he will spend time in Medina. It's about, I think, 200 kilometers away. You'd be totally wrong about that. He goes and he spends time in Medina. And it's there that he becomes familiar with, he starts working with Jewish rabbis. At the time, as I've said, the Arabian tribes were in utter disarray. There was a lot of violence, and Muhammad was from the Quraysh tribe. It was very wealthy, and this will be important for Muhammad later too, because he'll be a part of the weakest clan, and even there he'll be an orphan, and so he's not really a part of the wealth. He will be very concerned later on that the wealth is only used for a few individuals. This becomes very important. And of course, we've seen that he was raised as an orphan. Muhammad's prophetic critique. He saw himself as a prophet, and to this day, Muhammad is seen as a prophet. All right? I think I've got this later on, but another pillar is called the Shahada. I think I've got it spelled up here later, but here's the Shahada. There is one God. His name is Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. All right? And essentially, Muhammad is the last in a long line of prophets. Now watch this. Do Muslims believe in the importance of Jesus, yes or no?
Yes.
They do. Well, how do they see Jesus? What? I heard it.
Was he like a prophet?
Yeah, they see him as a prophet, long line. So you've got Moses was a prophet, and Isaiah was a prophet. I think even Elijah is in there possibly. And then Jesus is the next in line, He's right before Muhammad, but then Muhammad is the final prophet, and Muhammad is the authoritative prophet. All right? And so the Muslims actually believe, most Muslims actually believe in Jesus. Where they really have a problem is making Jesus God. All right? Well, watch this. I'm not very good with math, but watch this. So, to the Muslims, if God is God, that's one. And if Jesus is God, that's 1 plus 1. That's 2 gods. Okay? And at that point, you're no longer Muslim. You've moved into polytheism. And so they believe, quote unquote, they believe in Jesus. And in fact, some Sunni Muslims believe at the last day, Jesus is the one that's going to come back, not Muhammad. All right? And so Muhammad will be a prophet, and he will be a critiquer. And this will be very much in the Hebrew tradition. He will go against the old Arab code of honor. Basically, he will emphasize the importance to have a just society. He will be intolerant of injustice. And one of his major arguments, or one of his major, if you will, sermons or themes will be basically, it's wrong to stockpile wealth. Remember, he was in the cave doing what? He was praying, he was giving alms. He grew up in a very wealthy tribe, but he was not a part of that. He saw the misuse of that. And so as he begins, and I'm going to use something that's probably would be very offensive to Muslims, but as he moves now into this new religion, it's going to be a move away from polytheism, okay? And it's going to be away, I want you to remember this word, it's going to be away from the many. All right, does that make sense to you? The many, the multiple, all right? Muhammad's answer to society is, and some of us are going to love this, well, the problem with the culture and the problem with tribalism is you haven't put God at the center. All right, now go tribal on me. Go 610 tribal in Mecca. What's your argument back? So Muhammad stands up, and by the way, his sermons will eventually almost get him killed. He has to sneak out of Mecca and run away to Medina. His uncle actually protects him. So Muhammad has this controversial sermon, put God at the center of your existence. Come on, be tribal, argue against him. What would you say? Come on, I won't tell anybody. Be a polytheist for a few seconds. Go polytheist. Which one? That's exactly what happens in Moses in Exodus chapter 3. God shows up in a burning bush and Moses says, what's your name? All right, because he was raised. Okay. So, and this becomes the problem. Muhammad will say, put the God at the center of your existence. Well, you got 360 to choose from. He eventually will make a decision about that. You're supposed to pray 2 times a day. That's what it was then. It's become 5 times now. And then his religion eventually is going to be known as Islam, which of course is an Arabic word. And Islam essentially means to surrender, to submit. And in fact, some of you have heard this before, but Islam, here's my definition, okay? Basically, it is a religion of submission that brings peace to your life and to your world. It is a religion of submission that brings peace to your life and to your world. I'm not saying, this is about my best understanding of it. And some of you probably know this already, but you see this SLM. Arabic is a Semitic language. So you've got these 3 consonants. It's a tri-consonant language. SLM, all right? These are the same consonants. In Hebrew, I'm going to give you a word. You probably know this word. If I say shalom, you know that word?
Hello, goodbye.
No? Yeah, kind of. What does shalom mean, though, in what is it?
Peace.
It means peace. And so if you go to Jordan and you see someone in Amman, Salam, shalom. Get it? All right? And so Islam both means surrender and submission, but it also means the peace that comes with that. So basically, a Muslim is one who surrenders the whole being to the Creator. There it is. There's the Shah. There's only one God. All right? And there's Muhammad, his prophet. Okay? You good? You're good. So, what's that got to do with anything?
I've got one question.
Yeah.
So if you go back a slide, it said pray 2 times a day. When did that change to the, you said 5 times a day?
Yeah, it actually changed in Muhammad's time.
Okay.
The story goes, and again, a lot of this is from insider information, so we don't have a good historical scientific.
Right.
Okay. Muhammad, when he was in Medina, he says that we need to pray 2 times a day, and at first he had people pray to Jerusalem. When Muhammad is in Medina, he's working with these Jewish rabbis. They actually asked him to come and help settle some disputes even within the Jewish community. And so he's deeply influenced by Judaism. They eventually have a falling out, and so he changes their prayers from Jerusalem. He says, now you need to pray to Mecca. And then at some point when they finally get into Mecca, Muhammad only lived like 2 years after they got back to Mecca and smashed the gods and the goddesses, the idols in the Kaaba. He only lived about 2 years, died of a fever not long after that. But once he gets to Mecca, he decides that rather than 2 times a day, they need to pray 5 times a day. So he actually makes that decision at that point. Okay? Good. Anybody else? All right, let's moving on. A few more minutes. So how, 2015, how did these boys get involved in jihad? You've all heard of jihad. Look at all the Arabic you're going to go with tonight. Wow, share this with your papa. All right. What does jihad mean? What? That's the brainwashing. What does jihad mean? And did Muhammad talk about jihad? You betcha. Does jihad occur in the Quran? You betcha it does. What does jihad mean? Literally mean in the Arabic. Anybody know?
To serve?
Huh?
Doesn't mean to serve.
To
To serve? To serve and
No,
serve.
no,
Struggle.
no. What?
Like the struggle.
Where are you? There he is, back there. Exactly. Jihad means all it means is to struggle. It's, in many ways, and when Muhammad talks about it, it's not a holy war. There are other Arabic words for that. And so jihad means to struggle. And for most Muslims, all right, I'm going to talk about the difference between a moderate and an extremist. At this point, about 95 to 96% of Muslims would consider themselves moderate. 4 to 5% would consider themselves extremists, although you understand the extremists don't actually consider themselves as extremists. They don't call themselves extremists. They call themselves true Muslims. Okay? In some ways, this is way too simple. I never said that. Oh, wait, it's being recorded. All right, I said, in some ways, this is a major difference between the moderates and the extremists. And it is this: how do we define jihad? And for most moderate Muslims, so for instance, I got a really good friend, he teaches in Northeast State. He goes to the mosque in Johnson City. Did you know there's a mosque in Johnson City? Yes, all right. He goes to the mosque. He's a wonderful man. He's come in and done some guest lectures for me before. His jihad, he's from Pakistan, and he collects money. Only 6%, this was 10 years ago, I may be way off on my stats at this point. 10 years ago, 6% of the children in Pakistan could go to school. And so his jihad is to collect money over here and then send money to Pakistan so that boys and girls could go to school. You get it? And so for most Muslims, jihad is actually the struggle against yourself and the self-centeredness of yourself. Too many selves in there, isn't it? It's the struggle against yourself so that you can bring justice to other people. All right? Muhammad was an orphan, very concerned about distribution of wealth. You get it? You see this? Okay? And so, most modern Muslims believe that jihad is taking care of orphans, school, so forth and so on, giving to the mosque. These boys will have a very different interpretation of jihad. Sharif and Saeed Kouachi were raised in foster care. Already talked about this. Their parents were actually Algerian immigrants, and for most of us, especially in America, we're kind of like, who cares? Now, this is very important because in some ways, part of what I'm trying to grapple with, and now that, you know, I teach biblical studies, but also teach religion. As someone who studies religion, why did these boys do this? Okay? And then something that we try to explore in some of my classes, did they do what they did because of their religion? Or were there other factors? You with me on this? I'm going to argue many more factors. Their parents were Algerian immigrants. They had died there in Paris. Anybody know at least where Algeria is? I got a map coming up. Where is it? It's in Africa. All right? They grew up. This is the foster care home that they grew up in. You know, it looks really different, but look how normal, average that looks. Their parents were from Algeria. For decades, France had a war in Algeria, and they were fighting radical Muslims back in the 1950s. No, I do not remember that. But the French also committed some great atrocities, some terrible, I should say, atrocities against the Muslims in Algeria. This is just one shot. This is 1945, not long after World War II. These are Algerian men, Muslim men, who were massacred in 1945. France pulled out of Algeria late 50s, early 60s, but to this day, there are people who were able to leave Algeria and come to France to make a new life, but you've got all of this baggage. And I want to say this very carefully. It's important to understand. I've been to Paris and to France a number of times. In certain places in France, if you're an immigrant, then you're not going to get a good job. You know, and if you're darker, just be very honest. If you're darker, you're probably going to be judged. You're not really French. Now, do all of them believe this? No. But just like every culture, there's baggage, there's racism, and we're beginning to realize now that these boys were come from a very difficult position socioeconomically, and then Sharif is put into prison. You know how that goes. And of course, anybody know what a picture of this is? What is this? This is right after Charlie Hebdo, when the American leaders showed up to commemorate them, to memorialize them, also to show their solidarity. I think it's a beautiful picture. By the way, what country is missing here? We didn't send anybody over there, all right? Or did we? It was just a low level. Anyway, it was a big deal. But I think, again, we're so shocked, like, why would they attack the West? And I'm going to argue that one of the reasons why they turned to radical jihad is because there are no opportunities, and they've experienced deprivation sociologically, economically. They've experienced racism, all right? And by justifying it, no. But I think if we're going to understand what's going on in 2015, if we're going to understand some of these things, again, it's just too easy to say this is a violent religion or this is just kind of an anomaly. To me, it's a witch's brew, if you will. We don't have time for that. We'll move on. All right? Let me wrap it up with this. So what's the difference between a moderate Muslim and a militant Muslim? And by the way, I would argue that a lot of this applies also to Christianity, because I hope this doesn't offend your sensibilities. There are some wacky, crazy Christians out there, and there are some violent Christians out there. I don't know if you know this or not, but the KKK racist organization most of them are deeply religious. Did you know that? Yes or no? Deeply Christian. All right. You've probably seen Pat Robertson on TV. I personally, if your mama sends money to him, okay, don't tell her. But it's like I would see him as being a militant. What's the difference between being a moderate and a militant? I would argue that in some ways, and I'm going back to this idea of how do we define jihad. Moderate, basically, it comes down to interpretation. In other words, how do adherents understand their worlds, their God, their text? Are there violent passages in the Quran? Say yes. Yeah. All right? Do all Muslims act on that? No. Here's a question for us to really think about. Are there violent passages in the Old Testament? Yes. All right? Now, watch this. Because some of us, we were brainwashed in this too. Okay, that's easy. Well, that's Old Testament, you know? That's the Old Testament. That's why they call it old. All right? Is there violence in the New Testament? Oh, yes. One of the problems with the book of Revelation in the first couple of centuries in Christianity is most of the Christian fathers didn't want it in the Bible. Most of them, we're not talking about the heretics who lived out there on the wild side. We're talking about church fathers who basically said, we can't put the book of Revelation in because the Jesus in Revelation doesn't look like the Jesus in Matthew. All right? And so what I want to say is a lot of times what we need to understand is there a problem with the text? Yeah. But do we interpret it? Yeah, we do. All right? And in some ways, I always have to throw this word at you, even if I were talking about fly fishing. We got to talk about hermeneutics. Fancy word for the way that we think about the way that we think. And so a moderate thinks this way about jihad, a militant thinks another way about jihad. Good question. All right, last slide. I want to argue that there are 4 basic differences between a moderate and a fundamentalist, or a moderate and a militant. Let me talk about this, and I got 2 minutes, and your pain is over. Most militants practice a literalist reading, and I'm going to go, this word is very important, I'm going to go with this word, absolutism. They practice a literalist reading. What do I mean by a literalist reading? In many regards, if chapter 39 in the Quran says that you're supposed to kill the infidels, then that is literally what you're supposed to do. All right? There's no, and I'm going to use this word in just a minute, there's no contextualization to that passage. It's a rigid, literalist interpretation, and it's an absolutism that basically sees the world in black and white categories, if you will. There's no nuance. Number 2, militants do not practice contextualization. How do you like that for a late Tuesday night? They non-contextualize. In other words, it's non-historical. And so, well, Muhammad, you understand, he says this really violent thing against infidels. And so when he said it in, I don't know when he said it, you know, like 6:30, that's the same as saying it in 2015. So for many of the militant Muslims, you're justified in what you're doing because what you do in 2015 is the same that Muhammad would have done in 6:30. You get it? You see that? And so there's no contextualization. I forget exactly what passage this is. I think it's Numbers 22, but I could be, knowing me tonight, I could be like 80 chapters off. Somewhere in Numbers, Moses says to the children of Israel, go in, defeat these people, put everybody, even the animals, to sword, kill everybody, men, women, children. And then, but the virgin daughters, you can keep for yourself. They'll become your wives and your slaves. All right? That's in the Old Testament. Literalist reading is, I can do what I want. All right? I don't know of a decent Christian human being who would look at Numbers 22 and says, yeah, we should go do that. Okay? That's what I mean by contextualization, because if you come from a Christian worldview, then basically we got to handle those parts in the text, and there has to be a place where we go, no, we don't take those literally. Yeah? No. Okay? Number 3, this becomes very important in Islam, is politicized. For the militant, everything is politicized, and their God is an interventionist God, and so you know this, you know this so well, that basically they're doing the will of God. They're bringing justice right now. They're not waiting for God to do this. Let me say something very quickly, especially about Islam. You and I as Americans, and I love this, we've been marinated, bathed, soaked. We're drunk on the difference between religion and politics. All right? Church and state. Love it. Love the Constitution. There's freedom in America of religion, and that's not actually my favorite. My favorite is there's also freedom from religion. All right? People are like, well, I want a Christian America. Okay, what do you want? Roman Catholics? Southern Baptists? I'm going to vote for the snake handlers. All right? You know, I mean, what are we in America and in the West in particular, we have a rigid dichotomy. We hold to a rigid dichotomy between politics and religion, church and state. That's not Islam. And by the way, moderates jump in here too. Because for Muhammad, this new religion is a new politics. And this new religion was actually, for Muhammad, he wanted to bring justice to a tribal culture. And his answer, now watch this, his answer, if tribal culture is polytheistic and I gave you what word? Good, many. The answer in Islam, the answer to Muhammad is one. All right? And so, politically, if you actually worship the one God and you submit to the one God, we would live in a perfect world. Muslims believe, I talked about the zakat, giving alms. Ideally, if you're Muslim, you're supposed to give 2.5% of your wealth every year. And do you know where you're supposed to give it? What? No? Good? No church, no church. That's Christianity. Uh-huh. Maybe the mosque. You can give it to whomever you want to give it to. Doesn't matter. All right? And so their idea is if every Muslim actually gave 2.5, nobody would go hungry. Number 4, last thing, the militants, this is very important to them, they believe in a utopian future. Good is going to triumph over evil. And most Christians, like, well, one day God is going to triumph over evil, but not now. We're not going to actually make that happen. For the militants, they want the utopian future now. And they're going to take matters into their own hands. And, you know, probably a terrible way to end with this, but a lot of the Muslims believe that if they die in their jihad, in their holy war, what's their reward? 12 what?
72
70, it's debatable.
Yeah.
70 or 72 virgins are waiting for them when they get to paradise. Although there's some new work on this. Some Muslims believe they can't decide if it's actually virgins or grapes. That's true. That's true. Absolutely. And so there's a big debate, especially amongst those who are progressive. Okay. So let me say a couple things and I'm done. Basically, what's going on with Charlie Hebdo and the violence that occurred with Charlie Hebdo, is it a part of their religion? Well, yes. I would also argue it is more of an interpretation of the religion. And what's also important to understand is there are sociological factors going on. There are economic factors. How do you like that? I brought Dr. Broman. There are economic factors going on here. And I think we in the West, we need to understand this intelligently. So, yeah. Questions, comments? Thoughts?
Other questions? Any questions? Remarks?
Dr. Streetman?
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.